We're now 0.15 miles east along Bash Road from the entrance to the Pyramid Point trailhead. Looking north through the woods here directly toward the place we were just looking at before, Mary Miller's home site. And then as we move to the right here, we come to an old roadway, and the old fence line is here along the left side of the roadway. And what is this? Is this the property line, Laura?
I imagine it is.
Uh-huh. And it would be what Mary Miller had, and then who had it after her there on the left there?
I think that guy's name was Ed Snore, but I'm not sure. It was anyway Ed Snore's father.
You're talking about the land on the right here.
Yeah,
Uh-huh. And on the left it was Fred Baker?
yeah.
Okay. And this little lane here was used for what?
To go over the Pyramid Point.
Just various people could walk out through here and get out there just to see the scenery?
Yes.
Okay. We're now a few tenths of a mile west of Laura's place. I'll get the exact measurement here in just a minute. And we're looking north. Where we are is we've just come past the big dip that the road takes as it comes into the woods down here, kind of to the west of Laura's place. And along Bash Road we're looking north. And what are we looking at here, Laura?
You're looking at a spring that for years the Bashes used to get their water. And my husband's father cemented the thing in so that they could dip the water out and the water would run in from the spring. And they watered their cattle and their horses and all that what needed, and hauled water out of there to use up at the house until they had their well in. And the deer come here a lot to drink. I've noticed that. And my husband used to bring the horses down here, and then he'd go up on top of the hill. And we just came back from Mary Miller's, where she had built her little shack, and she had a stovepipe sticking out. And he used to be good with a slingshot, and he'd hit her pipe a couple times, and just to listen to her yell, and then he'd come home.
Uh-huh. And I've got it way zoomed in now, so all the little vibrations are being magnified. But as I zoom out, I don't know if it's going to show up on the picture here, but you can kind of discern an old route or an old roadway that was sort of leveled out here, leading right up to that spring. And could they get a horse and trailer right up to it?
I think they used a stone boat mostly.
Uh-huh. Could you describe that a little bit?
Well, it was made on the order of a sleigh, only bigger, and they could put a couple barrels of water on it.
Uh-huh.
And they'd dip them barrels half full or 3/4 full of water, and then they'd haul them up there to the house.
Was that used year-round?
No, I think in the bigger part of the winter it probably wasn't on account of the snow.
But the stone boat could be dragged over the bare ground?
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh. We're back up at the house now, but just to finish what we were talking about down there where the spring was, just a minute. Okay, about the drinking water, where we were just at that spring, was that where they actually got a lot of the drinking water for use here early on?
Yes, it was.
And when did they get water closer in here?
Well, in 1930 is when they put the big well in here, which was 365 feet deep.
Uh-huh.
and Charlie Crop started it, but he couldn't finish it, and so my husband went to his brother and nephew and told them that he would give him $100. Of course, at that time, $100 was like 1,000 now because right during the Depression. And he said, if you just finish it, and if you go 1 foot or 100, well, he asked him when they had it all in how much he owed him, and they said, well, you said $100, and he says, yeah, but you went a little farther. So he says, I think I owe you for the farther. Well, anyway, I don't know how they got it settled. I guess he just paid him the extra anyway, because he was so glad to have the well done.
Yeah. So up until about 1930, they had to haul water.
Yes.
And it was either here or one other, from the spring there, or else one other place?
Yes, so there's a well down there on what we call the Fluker place, is what it is.
Yeah.
And it's up again the hill, and there was a pump there, and they could find, he had a gasoline engine on it, and he'd take and haul it from there.
Mm-hmm. And that's also what became the Preston Wolf place?
Yes, that's right, what Preston Wolf owned.
And we'll go by there one of these days and shoot that spot, and then we'll know just where that is. Okay, January 17th, I think it's about a little after 10 in the morning, and we're parked in front of Laura's house right by the driveway and looking across the road. And what is this, Laura?
That's a line fence between Kohana and the government property, which used to be Howard Burfien's.
Okay, so you never owned any of the property over there. That used to be Burfien's.
That's right.
But you own a thin strip of property along the road over there?
Yes.
And that runs all up. Is that on both sides of this line over here, or just one side?
No, it goes right straight in. We own some of just a narrow strip, north and south, along this road,
Okay.
Bash Road.
Uh-huh.
We didn't know that until the government surveyed it.
Oh. Okay. Here we're looking at Camp Kohana property right across from Laura's driveway. And then it's this line of big trees here. And there's an orange stake in the ground and an old fence that can be found, and that's that property line. And then back here is the old Burfiend property, which is now park. And you owned a thin strip down there too?
Yes, not much along right here, but farther as it went down the road, about 100 feet, then ours branched off to the west and gone up over the hill.
Yeah, that's in that area that goes down toward where the original cabin was, and so on.
Yes.
Speaking of the old original log cabin down there, did you ever hear why it was that they moved from there up to here?
No, I didn't, but I think they liked it better up there or something, and so they built where they did, but they stayed away from the top of the hill enough to protect the place, buildings from the northeast wind, because they are one of our worst winds. And it's made it very good because this way the northeast wind just really hits very hard on top of this hill.
Just to better locate where that spring was that we documented earlier, we've just come north from Laura's farm and crested the hill and started down the hill and into the woods, and we're looking down at the bottom of the hill, and right at the bottom of this valley is where the old route took off to the right and went over to the spring, and it was just beyond the bottom of this valley that we were parked and looking directly across the valley at the spring. and the total distance there is just a little less than 2/10 of a mile north of the farmhouse in the driveway. We're now setting along Basch Road where it makes a big sharp curve and starts running east and west. And this is the place where the Pyramid Point Trail takes off. There's the trail post, and there's the trail, and it runs north from here and then runs along Basch Road back to the trailhead. And Laura is saying that her former property line was just a little bit east of here, I guess along this steep hillside, Laura?
Yes.
Between their property to the east and Fred Baker's, would it have been then to the west of here?
No, Schnorr's.
Oh, Schnorr, right. Well, we finally got a nice, pretty sunny day for this, and it's a good chance to see some of these pines that you planted years ago after your husband died, and how well they're doing in through here. This is just one small example of those thousands of pine trees that Laura planted. And we're now more or less across from her house and just a little bit north. I can come around here, and there is the barn. I can't go too far that way because it's almost looking right into the sun. But then here's the field north of the barn. Was this field used for anything particular when you had the farm, Laura?
Yes, we farmed it all the time, those hills. And we had wonderful corn crops. And one year we had a big field of buckwheat. And we got up in the morning to go to milk, and there was so many buck laying in the buckwheat that it wasn't funny. When we chased them, made a noise and made them get out of there. And we finally gave up. They just took the field of buckwheat. And then we had a field of beans over there, and they did actually the same thing with them. And then one spring, I had high blood pressure, and I used to get up at night, and I just couldn't sleep. And it would be a nice night, and I'd pile wood or something like that. And my husband one day said to me, he says, "Say, who piled all that wood?" And I said, "I did." And he said, "When did you do that?" I said, "When I couldn't sleep at night." And he says, "Why didn't you call me?" I says, "Because I couldn't sleep didn't mean you couldn't sleep." And so then we had a nice field of alfalfa over there, and if you had shot at random, you wouldn't have missed a deer. There were so many of them. They'd come up from the swamps. And we put newspaper out there to keep them from digging the alfalfa up. And through the newspaper, we put them on stone on them and that. And that's the way we saved that field of alfalfa.
The newspaper was right over the alfalfa?
Yeah, just here and there it would flutter, and that would make them scared. And one time I seen one of the most beautiful sights over there. It was right on the ridge, and I was going out to milk the cows at night, and I looked out, and here was a big buck coming up, and he stood out on the ridge. Pretty soon here comes another one, and he stood there right beside him or back of him. And before he got through, there was 5 of them, 2 on each side of the big buck facing him. I wished I had a camera like you have today with me. They could have taken that picture.
Yeah. So the bucks really do like buckwheat. They like it for bedding down?
Oh, they eat it like mad.
Uh-huh.
And the beans, too.
Uh-huh.
And they'll dig your alfalfa right out of the ground with the roots.
Yeah.
And we had beautiful corn there. This farm, for being hilly, has been well taken care of after we took over and we got the fields fixed up good, and we could raise just about anything.
Huh. We're now along the road just to the south of the house. This is the house right here that I'm pointed at. And here is the yard to the south of the house. And you referred to this area down here earlier as the orchard. There's one apple tree that I see that I'm coming to here, and there were a few others earlier?
Yes.
And This is where that one building came from that you dragged up there with your tractor?
Yes.
Okay. So there would have been several more, mostly apple trees in through here?
Yeah, there was apple trees in through there.
Uh-huh. And then coming on around here, we get into some more of your planted pines. I hope the sun's not messing up the picture too much by pointing toward it, sort of. But before you planted these nice pines, this was more of your cultivated fields?
Yes.
Were they anything particular different from anything else?
No, I think right at the time my husband passed away, we had it all in hay.
Uh-huh.
In fact, I know we did.
Okay. Here we are again, just about as far south as what we were yesterday when we looked at the old original cabin site for the Basch original log cabin, and looking out into that same field area. And this was part of your farm also, correct, Laura?
Yes.
And what did you have here?
Well, we had mostly hay. We raised potatoes down here in this valley. One time was the nicest potatoes you ever seen. And I have to tell you my experience. I always have faith in whatever should happen to me with the good Lord. And my husband was going to go away trucking. And he said, I don't think I can go because he says, that's got to be disked and dried yet. And I said, you go ahead. I'll get it done, Dad. And I disked, and when I a single disc, I didn't realize it. And I got all done. I had holes 3 feet deep, and just one right beside the other about where I disked. And I couldn't do nothing that day. And I thought, my husband's really going to bawl me out if he sees what I done. We got a great big thunderstorm. I mean a thunderstorm and lightning and rain. And I thought, oh, we had put 500 pounds of fertilizer on that land. And I thought, oh, it's all going to be way down in the flats. And I went down the next morning, and they hadn't lost a bit. Every hole that was there was 3 feet deep, and it had filled right up with water, all of them, and the fertilizer stayed right on that land. Well, I said it was a good Lord that told me all the things to do. And my brother-in-law come up to see how I was after the storm in the morning, and I said, I don't want to leave and look at my field. He said, mine is covered. I have to plant all my potatoes over. Well, we didn't have ours planted. I planted them afterwards. We had the nicest potatoes you ever seen.
Huh. That really worked out.
It sure did. And I told my husband about it. He said, well, I guess that's right. You shouldn't make your land so even.
Huh. And that was right down in this valley where I'm pointing right now?
Yes, it was.
And were you telling me one time that you had some kind of a corn shredder machine down in this area?
Yes.
And what was that, a permanent thing down there, or something you'd move around, or what?
No, we had this corn shredder. Our milkman from Kraft that got our milk, he told us we could use it because our corn had all froze that year and we didn't have a shredder. And so that was where my husband and I were shredding when he passed away.
And that was right down here.
Yes, that was in 1965.
Yeah, and you told us some about that on the audio tapes a couple years ago.
Yes.
That corn shredder would be a machine after you had used another machine to get the corn off the cobs, and then it would do something to the cobs, or was it the stalks?
We had it shredded, it husked it, and it shredded at the same time.
Oh.
And you would have your wagon beside it, and it would husk the corn, and that would go on the wagon, and then you'd shred it into a pile.
Uh-huh. By shred it, you mean the kernels would be taken off the corn?
No, the shredding was tearing the corn stalks up.
Uh-huh. So what about the kernels? Did the same machine get those off?
No, I had to do that. They didn't even husk good, but I had 2 big wagon loads better than 2 big wagon loads of corn, and Archie Brunson helped me. He was a neighbor. Get it taken care of so it didn't mold, and then I finally sold it afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Also from this same general location, off in the distance, I don't know how well it shows up on here, but there's a hill off in the distance there, and was that also part of your property?
Yes.
And was that used in any particular way different from the other property?
Yes, I can tell you what it was. We had 10 acres of corn one time up there one year. My husband working, and I started out cutting corn. And when you cut it, I had just a corn knife, and I cut the whole 10 acres with a corn knife and stacked it. You have a kind of a tripod you put your stalks up against, and then uh, after you'd done that, then you'd tie it in bundles, and then later on you come along after they're dry and you husk all of it. And I husked part of it, and he got home and he helped me husk the rest. I had a fellow tell me he didn't know how I ever took the courage to do all that.
Sounds like quite a job.
It was 10 acres by hand.
That's a beautiful field up there when you get up on top of there.
Yes, it is.
Did you used to go skiing up there, or it seemed like you might have told me about that once?
Oh, yes. Well, not skiing so much. I went snowshoeing with my dog. And I'd go clear around by Cluse and through there and come home this other way.
Oh, yeah. We're now down around the next bend in Bash Road, headed south, looking, what would this be at this point, Laura? Kind of northeast? Something like that.
Yeah.
And this also is part of your farm?
Yes.
And we can see on the left here now some of those pine trees that you planted. I think some of these trees are getting close to 30 feet tall at this point. They're really putting on the growth the last few years, you say?
Oh, yes. If you take that picture up there of that light pole, you can see how high the light pole is.
Uh-huh. Right up there. Some of them appear to be about as tall as that.
Yes.
And what was this field used for when you farmed it?
Well, we raised corn here and mostly hay. But we had nice cornfields in here, too.
Uh-huh. Were you saying something about building up the soil of the cornfield?
Yes, well, we had corn planted in here, and Art and I went to Traverse City, and we left the girls with Mr. Millington. And when we got in Traverse, we had such a terrible thunderstorm and downpour. And when we got home, we couldn't believe it. The corn was about 6 inches high or better, and you couldn't see nothing of it. It was just washed all to pieces. And so we had to work it up and try to get some corn started. And then he always took, instead of harvesting it for feed, he'd just go in and disc it all down and tried to build the field up. And he did a good job of it because it's in really good shape.
So rather than taking and using all of it, you returned some of it to the soil, and it paid off later on.
Yes.
We're now a little over 1/10 of a mile up Bash Road from the Weaver place. You might call it north, but the road actually is running kind of east-west at this point. And looking to the south, and this is an old fence line that you can barely make out here, but this right here is an old fence post, laying down a little stub of one, and then up above there's a fence post. And what was this property line, Laura?
That's between the Smith place and Bash place.
Okay, so you had it to the right or of here, and Smith had it to the left.
Yes.
And your property here is pretty much wooded. Was it wooded as long as you remember?
Yes.
And did you take anything from the woods?
Well, we took stuff that laid down and wasn't good, and we cut quite a lot of wood out and sold it.
Yeah. And did you say you which trees you would take?
Well, you take the trees that didn't look good, they weren't straight or was going to die down or something like that.
Uh-huh. And they had to be normally larger than a certain size?
Well, not when you took it out like that, but if you timbered any off, then you took it down to, I think it was 10 or 8 inches he took it.
Mm-hmm. And you also ran cattle through here?
Oh, yes.
And this is the looking at the other side of the road from that same spot, and you can see an old fence post and a little bit of wire here. And what is this, Laura?
That's a line that runs north and south here. There's one line runs north and south. That's between the Weaver place and the Basch place. And then, of course, there is fence running around this hill that they use for pasture.
Okay, we're back at the Weaver place. Just stopping on the way by, I wanted to ask you, Laura, you mentioned the other day that the Weavers at one point had adopted a child from the Millingtons. And I believe on the audio tapes a couple of years ago you mentioned that the Millingtons had a farm on M22 near here. Do you happen to know exactly why these folks ended up adopting someone from Millingtons?
No, I really don't. The only thing I know is that I believe it was either Mr. Millington's sister that had the child, and whether she died or whether she had it before she was married or what. But anyway, it should have been a child from the Millington family.
Uh-huh.
And he went and lived in Kalamazoo, the last that we know of, but I think they're all passed on now.
Mm-hmm.
And he had one child.
Mm-hmm.
No, he had 2 children, I guess. And they used to stay with us when they came up here.
The Millingtons did?
The Archie Weaver and his wife. See, he took the name of Weaver.
Oh. The child that got adopted by Weavers here?
Yes.
Huh. Okay.
And he took that name, and they stayed with us. And I haven't heard from him in years, so I'm almost sure they passed on.
Uh-huh. So you've mentioned various parts of the history of the area when children would be adopted if, well, for instance, when the mother died in childbirth or some other way, and sometimes if the mother wasn't married, then it was common for a child to be adopted out?
Yes.
Any other particular kinds of situations that you can think of that sometimes resulted in adoptions?
I think divorce might have too, sometimes when the mother couldn't take care of it. And in fact, I know this happens because it did in the Zeitz family. They grew up in orphanages, most of that family. And the father just deserted the mother and she couldn't take care of him.
Mm-hmm. Just didn't have the means.
That's right.
Okay, now we're parked along Basch Road, just a little east of the Weaver place, and we're looking right at the overlook here on Basch Road, and the hard curve in the road there by it. And Laura, you were telling me something about how the landline works here.
It runs east and west.
Okay, so it runs, like as we look at this picture, on the right side of the road is the property line where Schmidt would be on the right, and it's still Weaver on the left side of the road.
Yes.
And then as you follow that line where the road curves, then what happens?
Well, you just have to follow the road would run, the line would run right down over the hills and go clear to the commons.
Okay, so the way we're looking, the property line continues right down this line straight where the road curves, and Weaver Zone to the left. But then where the road curves, it would on the other side of the road, it would no longer be Smith. Then that would be your childhood farm?
No, that's farther over where we seen that road by the grove there. That's the line there.
Okay. Who owns across the road, if we go straight here and across the road and then to the right?
That's it. Which part are you looking for?
Okay, just a minute. Okay, Laura has just explained to me that if you follow this line straight across the road, and then on the other side of the road, on the right side of the property line, that would still be Schmidt or Smith. They changed their name at one point. And so they owned everything to the right here, at this point and continuing on down the hill there. And then it's Weaver to the left. And further on we'll see where the line is between Smith and Laura's childhood farm. Laura and I have not done this for a while because we've been waiting for the roads to open up after winter. Now we've got a beautiful early spring day, and we're going to continue this process here. When we last finished, we were talking about the property lines between the Schmidt farm and over on the other side there. And now we're down here parked along Basch Road, just a couple hundred feet north of Laura's childhood farm, which is right over here at an angle. You can see it right there looking east. Well, this would be kind of southeast. And this is the old roadway we were looking at before that goes over to the bluff and down the bluff. And this constitutes the property line between these two farms, the old Olson farm and the Schmidt farm. Here we are parked on Basch Road, right opposite the driveway to the air camp. And this is where the boundary line, Laura just told me, between her childhood farm, the Olson farm to the left, and the Eckert farm to the right, which includes the site of the log cabin here that Laura's folks occupied before Laura was born. We've talked about that. That's right about there. And then on down the way, all of that is the Eckert farm, and across the road, once you get past the Schmidt farm, to what we now call the Eckert Bauer farm, was all part of this same piece of property. Is that correct, Laura?
That's right.
We're now along Basch Road, approximately a quarter mile north of Kelder House. I'll get the measurement here in a minute, but I'm looking more or less to the east here, up into this wooded hillside, and you can just maybe make out the trace of an old roadway. And Laura, where did you say this old roadway went?
This roadway went up to where the air camp is now, and we're on Basch Road.
Yeah.
And at that time, I don't know if it is even called Basch Road, but then below Walter Hodig's, right in the woods there, across from Hames's, the road was so sandy and ruts, and my husband had a Model T Ford in 1917, and they couldn't get through there hardly, the ruts would be so bad, and of course they had those old narrow tires. And so my father was called Shorty a lot, and he said, Shorty, get that road fixed. And so they hauled a lot of gravel in there right from this gravel pit. And the guys hauled it down. Some people had teams, and then there was men with the shovels up here shoveling gravel onto what was a wagon, the high-wheel wagon, and it had planks on the bottom around the reach across, and then one plank on the side. And then when they'd get up there, they had to lock the wheel coming down because the horses couldn't hold it. And then when they get down here to right where we're sitting, they would unlock it, and they would haul the gravel up there, and then when they got to where they wanted to empty it, they'd just tip the planks and tip the gravel over, and then it would run out, and then the guys that was there would spread it, and they would come back and get another load.
So up this road, up to the area where the air camp now is where the old gravel pit was that they got that gravel.
Yes.
Okay. I've just measured that last spot we were at talking about the gravel pit and so on was just about a little over 2/10 of a mile north of Kelder House Road. And now we are about 300 feet north of Kelder House Road along Basch, looking more or less to the east, a little bit north of east. And I don't know if it shows up in the picture here, but I can just make out from here this time of the year with the way the snow is, an old trace of an old roadway that angles up the hill through the woods there. Who used to use that road, Laura?
Well, I think Uncle Charlie's used it first, Charlie Olson's, and then Albert Prouse has used it, and then my brother Howard used it.
So that was the people who occupied this farm down here would use that road to get up to what?
Up to their flats on top of the hill, because that's where they did most of their farming.
There's some of the farm fields up there associated with this farm?
Yes.
The current Bertha Olson farm.
Yes.
And you say there was also another gravel pit up there?
Yes. No, wait. I think it was Porter Molders, or if it was an asphalt plant anyway that was down here by the Stebner Road, and they got all the gravel from up there and hauled it down there to make the asphalt, and they also used that on other parts of the road. And my husband helped haul gravel out of there, and that was 60 years ago, because my oldest girl was just about 2 years old, and I used to take her down to my mother's, and she'd ride all afternoon with her dad in the truck when he'd be hauling gravel out of there.
Huh. And you also just pointed out something that I never noticed before, right about here where I'm pointing the camera. You say there's a big depression in the ground.
Yes, there is. There's two of them I see now. I knew there was two there, but I didn't know exactly where, but now I can see the other one. And I think they're just, I can't say how deep, but they're real deep.
Uh-huh. And the other one would be right about here where I'm pointing the
Yes.
camera. And those are just natural holes in the ground.
Yes.
Uh-huh. We're now right at the turnaround at the end of the road, Kelder House Road, past the Bertha Olson place. And looking more or less to the east would be right about like this. And then the old fence line here that runs that way. And you were just telling me, Laura, that as well as an old fence line, there's an old roadway here.
Yes.
And who mainly used that roadway?
Well, the Prouses owned the Stebner place, too, at the same time, and they owned this, and they used that as a road going back and forth.
Uh-huh. Just a little dirt farm lane, basically?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Looking now more toward the south, I can't get this whole barn in the picture from where we are, but this is the barn that goes with the Bertha Olson place, and we were just going through some dates that we read in a booklet that gave some of the history, and it said that talked about who had it early on, and then Ole Olson, Laura's grandfather, had it, and then Charlie had it, and let's see, it said that Charlie sold it or moved in 1915, and you were saying, Laura, that doesn't quite sound right to you?
That doesn't sound right according to my age, and because I can remember coming home from school and they were moving, and so I was born in 1911, and I must have been 7 years old at that time.
So it had to be more like 1918 or so
Yeah.
that they moved. But then the rest of that sounded about right to you. That,
Yes.
Then they sold it to Prouses, who had it until about 1954 when Howard took over here.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. We're still in the same place now, looking kind of northwesterly. What is this building, Laura?
That's a granary. And it was built up on what is now the Walter Hodick place, but it belonged to my father, George Olson. And the siding that's on it came off the old Port Oneida church. And when Uncle Charlie tore it down, he let my dad have the siding. And so that's where that came from. And then when Howard bought this place now from the Prouses, he moved it down here.
Do you remember him moving it, actually? Or just that it was moved?
Well, I don't remember him really moving it
Yeah.
because he did it while I was gone a lot.
Oh, yeah. Okay, we've just come back toward the house a little bit, and we're looking toward the garage here on the south side. And you were going to tell me something about this, Laura?
Yes, it was a garage for Howard's car, but he also had a Ford tractor, and he put that in there and housed it in there too. And one time, Walter Hodick, he was always up to something, and he put some kind of a smoke bomb. Now, I believe it might have been in the car. And Howard went in to start it, and all of a sudden this smoke bomb went up. And Howard went out of that garage just as fast as he could go. And he always laid it to my husband, but my husband didn't do it. It was Walter Hodick that did it, but he wouldn't admit it.
You got your husband in trouble, huh?
No, he didn't. He just blamed Art, but Art would take the blame. He didn't
Yeah.
worry about it.
Oh, yeah.
And while you're looking at it,
Yeah.
there's an old marking that they used to mark potato ground and stuff like that. Right on the side, you see the chains and the poles and all?
Yeah, right here.
Well, that's what we used to mark when we'd get the ground all ready for corn and all that stuff. One would be on each end, and we'd have to be very careful so we stayed right in line so we could have markers straight.
So you would walk down the field with two people holding either end of it?
Yes, and when you marked 10 acres or so in one day, you know you did a day's work with that. Because you'd mark it both ways so you had squares to put your corn or potatoes or whatever you was planting in.
Huh. Now, why would you have to walk with that thing? Wouldn't there be a way to use a tractor or a horse-drawn thing to do it?
No, there was no way. You had to, one person on each end.
Uh-huh.
And many acres of ground. In fact, there was, I think, a field about 15 acres high up here on the place that's up here. And I helped my dad mark it one time when I was a kid, my brother and I. And we knew what a day's work was there.
Yeah. And you just called that a marker?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think you even see any around like that anymore.
No, I never even heard of such a thing.
But you see the chains, there's the chains on it, and it would do a good job of marking.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're now parked in front of the Henry Eckert, was it?
Yes.
Henry Eckert Bauer Farm. And the barn is kind of hidden behind some spruce plantings here. But then what were the other buildings? What's that green one kind of behind and to the left of the barn, Laura?
That was a chicken coop. And Mr. Eckert needed a chicken coop, and he asked my dad for if he could have some logs up there on his place, and he did. He took enough to build the whole thing. And then just back of it is a pig coop they had.
Okay, we can't see that now, but
Yeah.
it's right behind the chicken coop.
Yes.
Okay, so Eckert's kept chickens and pigs most of the time?
Yes, and cows.
Yeah, kind of like your farm.
Yes.
Okay. And then there's another building to the left of the chicken coop.
That's a granary. And they
Okay.
use it now for storage with cars and stuff too.
Hmm. And the next building over, is that the privy?
That's right.
Okay, just a minute then. Okay, we can't see the privy any longer. It was kind of back here, and then moving left, kind of behind and to the right of the house, there's another building. What was this, Laura?
That was a milk house, and had a separator in there, and they separated the milk and stuff like that, and had the cream in there.
Uh-huh. And then there's the house, and I guess that's all the buildings I can see.
Yes, that's all the buildings there is.
Okay. Now, all these little spruce and pine trees that are planted around the Bauer farm, you were going to say where they came from?
They came from the conservation department,
Mm-hmm.
and they would, if you planted them, they gave you the trees to plant them. And I don't remember whether we got paid for planting them or not, but Walter was great. Walter Bowers was very great for trying to preserve and make things look good and plant pines. And he got me started, and I have up at my place 6,500 trees that I have put out. Of course, 500 somebody else planted because I wasn't well enough, but the rest of them I planted all.
Mm-hmm. Now, as we look around this farm, Laura, and you spent a lot of time here because you were good friends with the Eckerts when you were a child. Other than the planted pines and spruces, does anything come to mind that would be noticeably different the way this place is now than in the old days?
No, I don't think so. I think it's about the same. Maybe a few of the apple trees are down is all because they were old and they finally are letting up on their life.
Uh-huh.